Good day, everyone. I am Abdul Kadir Al-Sofi and welcome for our discussion for today. For today's video, we will talk about grammatical structure. But before that, allow me to recognize our reference professor, Professor Zeki Hamawand, on his book, Modern Schools of Linguistic Thought. At the end of this video, we will be able to examine grammatical models, explain the grammar of particular languages, and we are going to define set of rules that allow the certain linguistic structure and disallow them. This is our outline for this topic. Now, what is grammar? Grammar is the system of language. Grammar reviews to a collection of rules determining what accounts as grammatical and ungrammatical language use. In grammar, the rules govern the formation of words, phrases, clauses, sentences, and up to the whole text. Grammar helps speakers to produce error-free utterances, enhance accuracy, and reduce confusion. Grammar also subsumes the subfields of phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. Now, why do we study grammar? Grammar provides and helps us to control over language as a medium of expressions. Grammar helps us become more effective writer or speaker. Grammar guides thinking. Grammar accustoms us to accuracy in language and in thinking. And also, grammar helps us to develop a routine thinking in a logical and clearer way. Also, we study grammar to solve problems of ambiguity in speech or writing. Also, grammar is essential or very important in every aspect of life for clarity of meaning and intent. And lastly, grammar provides a basis for learning other languages. Now, there are different grammars in English. First, we have the rule-concerned grammars, and this is composed of two parts. In language, a rule is a regulation or instruction that describes the way things are or should be. Now, it is a statement of observed regularity in language use. A grammatical principle that describes the ways in which the words, phrases, and sentences in a language can be used. So, we have two kinds. We have the prescriptive grammar. I know some of you are familiar with this. And we have the descriptive grammar. Now, this prescriptive grammar describes how a language use should be and what rules should be followed. The focus on this is on the standard variety. It tells us, the speaker, what should and what should not. Descriptive grammar, on the other hand, describes how a language is actually used by the speakers. The focus here is on the standard and the non-standard varieties. The descriptive grammarian then describes what is done. On the other hand, prescriptive grammar, it seeks to establish norms of correct and incorrect usage based on a set of rules which govern how a language should or not should be. Now, these rules address to linguistic aspects such as spelling, pronunciation, vocabulary, syntax, and semantics. Now, in a prescriptive grammar, the rules are not based on the actual use. Some rules are invented by grammarians, other follows Greek or Roman or Latin practices. In prescriptive grammar, there is just one way to say thing. Okay? Just remember that prescriptive grammar is based on a mode of reasoning known as prescriptivism. This is an approach that says the enforcement of rules on how language should be used. Prescriptivism, these are people who practice the laying down norms for language use and concern correct usage. There are principles of prescriptive grammar. First, we have the rigidity. Grammar in this set rigid of rules of syntax that decree how the people sought to speak or write, and they insist on absolute standards of usage. Any failure to conform to such standards is evidence of poor education or bad taste. The number two, correctness. This is the next principle of prescriptive grammar. Correctness. When we say correctness, grammar is concerned with establishing the norms of correct and incorrect usage. So in this, with formulating these rules based on the norms to be followed by the language users, it is the grammarian who decides what is right or what is wrong, or what is good or what is bad in the language. Now, number three, a principle is on the conservativity. Grammar on this principle is very conservative by its very nature and its purpose. It is not given to language innovation, a language change, and foreign influence. Now, in this principle, we consider language as evolution of the synonymous with corruption. And let's proceed to number four, the purism. When we say purism, this is the number four principle of prescriptive grammar. This grammar is influenced by Latin because of the status which the ancient language held on centuries in Europe. Now, the focus here is on the standard forms, and so it constrains the linguistic behavior. And finally, the last principle of prescriptive grammar is judgementality. Grammar is judgmental in this part. It specifies how a language should be used. It is an expression which is acceptable only if it conforms to the set of prescribed rules. Now, judgment here is passed by the authorities, educated speakers, language scholars, and great authors. On the other side of the story, we have the descriptive grammar, which presents a scientific, objective, and non-judgmental description of grammatical system of the language. Now, it does not enforce rules on this side. It is concerning to the correct or incorrect of usage. Rather, in this grammar, it examines the patterns that underlie the use of words, phrases, clauses, and sentences. So in this descriptive grammar, it is based on idea of the descriptivism. Descriptivism is the belief that it emphasizes the description of the actual usage of language in a particular time. So in this, we describe how the language is actually used by the group of people in a speech community. So it is a set of rules about a language based on how it is actually used. In this grammar, the descriptive, there is no right or there is no wrong language. So instead, there is objective description of grammatical constructions in the language. Now, just like the prescriptive grammar, descriptive grammar also has 5 rules. The first principle is on objectivity. So objectivity, in this principle, we set also rules, but it is based on how the language is actually used in various contexts. The rules here are formulated as recognitions of the way speakers and writers uses a language for communication. The goal is to state how language actually works on its simple way. And the number 2 principle is on factuality. It records actual usage and formulates the rules on its basis. In this principle, it does not prescribe rules, but rather it describes facts about language. In this principle, there is no right or wrong language. Usage here is the only measure appropriateness or acceptability of the language. The next principle is change. In this principle, it undergoes change, the descriptive grammar, because the language is prone to be affected by change. So change here can occur unpredictably. So that's the third principle of the descriptive grammar. The number 4 is the equality, which defines a language in its own terms. So description includes standard and non-standard varieties because both are used in daily life by the speakers from all walks of life. So it does not impose findings from the description of other languages. And the final principle of the descriptive grammar is on the non-judgment. So grammar in this is non-judgmental in attitude, not just like in the prescriptive grammar, which is judgmental. But we are not being judged here on the descriptive grammar. This is only based on what people say and not on what grammarians dictate. So unlike the judgmental grammarian who reflects a critical point of view, a non-judgmental grammarian adopts and unbiases the approach. We are going to compare and contrast our two descriptive and prescriptive grammar with this Venn diagram here showing the differences between the two. So in the prescriptive grammar, in general, the rules are constitutive and regulatory, determining how people should be used in the language, while on the descriptive grammar, the rules are illustrative and representational, showing how people actually use the language. The second difference is that on the prescriptive grammar, the value judgments often used to improve on users of a language rules correct usage, as recorded by the authoritative resources, while on the descriptive grammar, it does not make value judgments. Just like I taught you last time, it seeks to present a systematic description of a language as found in actual samples of actual speeches or writing. On the prescriptive grammar, it describes the structure of a language as a relative small group of people. This brings language into conformity with the standard. And while on the other hand, the descriptive grammar describes the structure of a language as it is actually used. It accepts the patterns that people use in speech and writing and tries to account for them. On the other hand, the fourth is on the descriptive grammar. It is either or a system dealing with what the grammarian believes to be good or bad. While on the other hand, it is elaborative in the descriptive. When we say elaborative, it is open system regarding all structures as valid. So it would consider a written or spoken text to be grammatical already if it were actually produced by the native speaker of the language. And finally, on the descriptive grammar, it's followed by the teachers, the editors, the proofreaders, while on the descriptive grammar, it is followed by the theorists and the linguists. Now, to continue our discussion, we have here the form-concerned grammars. So, we have also two types on this. It refers to the sentence structure composed by the specific grammar rule. That's the form-concerned grammars. So, in a form-concerned grammar, we have also two, the structural grammar and the generative grammar. When we say structural grammar, this grows from the work of Ferdinand de Saussure, one of the best leading work of Saussure is on the structural grammar, and it studies the surface of structure of the components of the language. On the other hand, a generative grammar is on explaining the universal qualities of a language in terms of rule. This is growing, or this has grown with the work of Noam Chomsky, and studies both the surface and the deep structure of the components of the language. So we will discuss this one by one. Now, on the structural grammar, this is a model which is regards to the grammar as a device. So in this grammar, words are combined into a larger unit of syntax. So what do you mean by that? This is primarily concerned with the form of linguistic expression rather than its meaning. So in this, we define linguistic expression in terms of their syntactic functions, okay? So that is also on the grammatical categories. Now, our focus here is on the mechanics of constructing sentences, and we ignoring their implications in actual speech. Okay, so it emphasizes and explains the functions of language components and the relationship to the without reference to meaning. So in here, a language is seen as a system of signs. So the bond between the form and the meaning of a linguistic expression is arbitrary. This means linguistic forms are said to be locked and in any physical correspondence with the entities in the world to which they prefer. So in the structural grammar, this is based on the structuralism. This is philosophy that postulates a description of how language is actually spoken. So it describes the natural way of the use of language without reference to any norms. So our structuralists aim to give an objective account of the patterns of the specific language at a particular point in time by describing its features without making subjective right or wrong judgments. So that's the structural grammar. We also have principles of structural grammar. So the first is on the it gives priority to the forms of language. So in here, the speech is primary and writing is essential means of representing speech. So the priority of speech over writing implies that it recognizes the implication of speech being older and more widespread than writing. So in the structural grammar, the number 2 is, it is empirical. The linguist's task is to describe the way people actually speak and write their language, not to prescribe how they do so. So it means it makes the study of language more scientific, methodical, and verifiable. And we also have the principle of being synchronic. So the linguist is interested in the description of the state of language at some particular point in time. So observing and recording instances of language use. The next principle is on being grammatical in the system. So what do we mean by this? It recognizes the uniqueness of each language. The grammar here is an inventory of items. So that's the fourth principle. And finally, the last principle of structural grammar is on its form. Okay? It neglects aspect of meaning that go beyond literal meaning. It makes no attempt to identify implied meaning. So therefore, in structural grammar, it ignores many aspects of meaning behind those words of the sentences. Now, in the structural grammar, there are two best-known examples of both from the American structuralists, which is the constituent structural grammar and the tagmemics. Now, on the constituent structural grammar, this is a model introduced by Leonard Bloomfield in 1933. It analyzes sentence wholly in terms of the hierarchical structure layers. So the use here is on the immediate constituent analysis, referring to the major divisions that can be made within the structure of any level. So the analysis here is beginning on the smallest constituents that can be joined together to form hierarchical higher or any larger one. So a sentence can be analyzed into a series of constituents such as noun phrase or VP or NP and the verb phrase, which is the VP. This can be analyzed into further constituents. So the NP might consider for to be a determiner plus noun. Okay? So until no further division is possible. So that's the constituent structural grammar. For example, in a sentence, the child is playing. Each word is a constituent. So the immediate constituents would be the child and is playing. So those are the two. This in return can be analyzed into immediate constituent. This is the child plus is playing. Okay? And the process continued until it is irreducible constituents called the ultimate constituents are reached. So the constituent, the child, can be replaced by the noun phrase, she, and is playing can be replaced by plays, the VP. So the result here is can be analyzed into various ways. One of the example is we are familiar with the tree diagram. I know we are very familiar with that. Or the box diagram, we have also that. So the segmentation is supported by various tests on the different aspect of the constituent grammar structure. On the other hand, we have the tagmemics. So this is a model of grammar originated by Kenneth Lee Pike in 1950s. So in this, it emphasizes the hierarchical structuring of language with a minimum unit of grammar named tagmeme. Okay, we have the tagmeme. So a tagmeme is a complex unit in context. It is complex because each unit embodies a number of features. So it is a unit in context because each unit is defined in terms of the distribution of some larger context. So tagmemic analysis language is seen as comprising three systems. So we have the phonological, the lexical, and the grammatical. So in each system, there are number of levels. So in the grammatical system, for example, there is a morpheme level, the word level, the phrase level, the clause level, and the sentence level, and also the paragraph level. So on each level, there are tagmemes displaying relationship between grammatical function and the classes of linguistic items filling these functions. And we are down to our next type of the form structural grammar, which is the generative grammar. So in this model, the grammarian views the system of rules that generates an intimate number of sentences. It attaches more importance to the form of the linguistic expression than its meaning. So, for example, in the syntax. So in the syntax, the central module is independent of the semantics and the pragmatics. It views as the computational system. So where structure is result of rules, not of communication function. So in generative grammar, it embraces the notion of the generativism approach. Generativism is a belief that states a description of rules that embody the creative capacity of the native speaker to understand and produce an endless number of sentences. So we generate grammar unendingly. Okay, so generative grammar assigns every sentences in two levels of structure: the underlying or the deep structure and the surface structure. So what are these? So when we say underlying or the deep structure, this is closer to the semantic context of the sentence, while on the other hand, the surface structure digs to the syntactic form of the sentence. The underlying deep structure is mapped into the surface structure with definite transformations. So later we will discuss more on this. So generativists aim to account that for the notion of indicating precisely through a set of rules that can be and cannot be said in a language. So the aim here of the generative grammar is to propose rules, include transformations, and relate deep and surface structure. Now we have the principles of generative grammar. We have economical, because it uses fewer rules. Next, we have the generativity, because it combines of the words, and the grammar is seen as self-contained algorithm device. Next principle is creativity, because generative grammar seeks to explain how speakers understand and produce infinite number. Okay, so this means to express countless thoughts. So that's creativity. So number 4 principle of generative grammar is productivity, because the ability is to form new expressions using limited set of elements. So in this productivity, it refers to the limitless ability to use language to describe new things, to produce a new expressions. And finally, we have the reductionism, because in reductionism, this is a complex phenomenon by analyzing the smaller constituent parts. So in this, we are explaining a complex set of entities or structure by another simpler set. So entities here is given kind of collections of entities with a simpler or more basic kind. Okay, so we are now done with the 2 major topics, and we are now on the 3rd and final topic. So the transformative grammar or the transformational generative grammar. This is another grammar model by Noam Chomsky on his book Syntactic Structure in 1957. So in here, it describes a language in terms of transformations. It applied to an underlying deep structure in order to generate a surface structure of sentence which can be actual occur. So in this, it involves adding, deleting, moving, and substituting words. First, the semantic component of the sentence is determined by deep structure. And then the second, the phonological component of the sentence is determined by the surface structure. And the third is on the transformational component, converts the deep structure into a surface structure. Now, one of the example here is between the active and the passive voice, which we can understood the transforms of each other, because we can transform active sentence to passive sentence and vice versa. And finally, we have a generalized phrase structure grammar. This is another model of grammar which originated in the first half of 1980s. It contains rules also, which are capable of only generating strings of elements. So in here, for example, one phrase structure rule specifies that a sentence or S can be rewrite as NP and the VP. That is noun phrase plus a verb phrase. Now, a sentence then is defined as a sequence of NP followed by VP, right? So, a noun phrase can be rewritten as a determiner plus noun, and verb phrase can be rewritten as a verb plus noun phrase. Now, the structure of sentence as generated by this is illustrated on the tree diagram that you can see. Now, we have the different similarities and differences of the form concerned grammar, because we said we have the structural and this generative grammar. So, as you can see, the structural is descriptive in approach, while generative is generative in approach, right? So, next is the focus on the structural is on the spoken language, while the focus on the generative is on the competence of the linguistic knowledge processed by the native speaker. And the third, structural correctness is determined by usage, while the generative correctness is determined by the intuition of native speakers. And number 4, it focuses on the idea that every language is unique. That's the structural grammar. And the generative grammar focuses on the idea that language share universal features which are part of the generative endowment of human beings. And finally, the structural grammar ignores meaning. Instead, it focuses on the surface structure of the sentence. While on the generative grammar, it ignores meaning too. However, it focuses on the relationship between deep end structure and the surface structure and the transformational rules which we relate them. Now, meaning concerned grammar, we are going to talk about the functional and the cognitive grammar. When we say functional grammar, this is another model of grammar as a medium of social exchange. So, in here, we concentrate more on the function performed by the linguistic expression than its form. Alright? So, we interpret grammatical forms in terms of grammatical functions. Alright? So, the relationship between the form and function is perceived as iconic. So, it means the functional grammar based on the functionalism, which states that views of language as social interaction. So, we focus here on the set of meaning choices, not on the formal rules. Alright? So, in language and linguistic forms which match them. To realize it, the aim of functional grammar is to take account of contextual factors which influence linguistic structure of the functional grammar. Now, we have also the principle of functional grammar. We have the system of choice, which is the number 1. The meaning of this is that we will have to set options to choose from statement sentences, question sentences, imperative sentences. If we choose question, for instances, we will choose, we have another choice. That is why it becomes system of choice. That's the first principle. When you go to the questions, now what kind of questions, right? Now we have another choice. We have the yes or no questions, the WH questions, alternative question, and so on. Now the choice here is not arbitrary. There is a reason for choosing one instead of another. So, in the functional grammar, you cannot choose this because you just like to, but it is determined by the stylistic and the contextual factors of the grammar. Number 2 principle is the segmental. So, for example, in the sentence, the kids are playing, the two morphemes kid and the S form word kids, the two morphemes play and ing form the word playing. So the words the and the kids constitute a nominal group. The words are and playing constitute a verbal group. So the two groups then form a clause. The third is on the organizer. So functional grammar is also organizer. In what sense? For example, we are going to organize this structure clause into a theme and the rem. So the topic on this sentence, for example, on the sentence, the driver parked the car on the pavement. Now, the driver is the theme, while park the car on the pavement is the rem. In the sentence, on the pavement, the driver parked the car, on the pavement is the theme. Now, while the driver parked the car is the rem. And the fourth one is functional grammar is on classification. It means it classes grammatical categories in terms of their communicative functions. All grammatical constituents, be they affixes, words, phrases, sentences, have syntactic, semantic, and pragmatic functions. So, the syntactic function includes such as the subject or the object. On the semantic function, it includes role as an agent and recipient. And the pragmatic function concerns on the meaning that constitutes its context. And finally, the functional grammar function as a degree of abstractness of linguistic analysis because it carry out by avoiding transformations, avoiding empty elements, disallowing filter devices, and disallowing abstract lexical decomposition. So, likewise, the degree of practicality of linguistic analysis is carried out by the typological adequacy, pragmatic adequacy, and psychological adequacy. Now, there are functional grammars by Simon Dick in 1997. The most two important are the systematic functional grammar and the role and reference grammar. Now, the systematic functional grammar is introduced and developed by the British linguist Michael Halliday in 1960s. So, in this tradition of the London School and the work of the British linguist John Robert Firth, it studies language as part of the social systems. Now, in here, it defines language as a resource of creating meaning by means of wording. So, in this, the language has developed in response to three functions. First, we have the ideological function, the interpersonal function, the textual function, and the lexicgrammar combines the syntax and the lexicon as a single system. Now, role and reference grammar is another model of grammar developed by William A. Foley and Robert Van Valen in 1980s. So, what are they talking about here? So, in here, the grammatical description is looking at the language as structure in terms of four categories: the surface forms, underlying semantic structure, modifying grammatical elements, and pragmatical information structure. Now, we have also the cognitive grammar, another model which regards grammar as inventory of linguistic expressions, where the structure is the result of conceptualization. So the highlight here is between the form and the meaning of linguistic expressions. So cognitive grammar is founded on the intellectual basis of cognitivism. I know some of you are very familiar with cognitivism. This is a belief on language is integral part of cognition. It considers the language used to be pairings of semantic structure with phonological structure. So cognitivists aim to identify the process of cognitive which are responsible for comprehension and production of linguistic units. Now we have the principle of cognitive grammar. First, it is general cognitive govern. What do you mean by this? Language is governed by general cognitive principle rather than special purpose language. So in here, language is a cognitive ability like perception, attention, and memory. So The claim here, therefore, is on the language to be compatible in any other related discipline like the psychology, neuroscience, and biology. The second principle is on the symbolic view of language. So the meaning here is that there are three kinds of grammatical units. We have the semantic, phonological, and the symbolic. When we say symbolic, this is on the phonological structure with meaning, the semantic structure. The form and meaning here are equally contributed to make an expression. So that's number 2 principle of cognitive grammar. And the third is on the meaning. We focus also on the meaning, and so it is structure of the meaning, be it lexical, morphological, and syntactic meaning. And the third is on the usage base. So there is no principal distinction between knowledge of language and the use of language, since the knowledge of language is knowledge of how language is used. Now, in this principle, the grammar is based on usage events. So that means we provide speaker with variety of structural options to present their view of given scene. And finally, there is no privilege, there is no principle. Cognitive grammar considers the grammar of the language as representing the whole. So this means that the speaker comprehend and produce a language is determined not by rules, but the symbols standing for linguistic units. Now we have here also the comparing and contrasting of our meaning concerned grammar. We have the functional grammar and the cognitive grammar. So on the functional grammar, we consider it as vehicle of human communication. On the other side, we consider it as instrument of thought. Functional grammar assumes logical commitment, while cognitive grammar assumes experiential commitment. And functional grammar essentially is essential process oriented, but cognitive is a construction-based oriented grammar. And functional is referential semantics, while cognitive is a conceptual semantics approach. And finally, functional sees discoursal or contextual factors as having a bearing on the structural properties of language, while cognitive sees cognitive factors evidenced by human cognitive capacities, such as the category, domain, and construal as having a bearing on the structural properties in language. And finally, in this last grammar kind of grammar is the construction grammar. The theory of this is developed by Adele Goldberg. There are 5 basic principles on this. First, we have construction is the only unit of grammatical representation. Number 2, construction are symbolic units. Number 3, each construction has specific syntactic configuration. And number 4, constructions are organized in a network. And finally, knowledge of language emerges from language use. We have also the word grammar. This is introduced by Richard Hudson. According to this, the first language is a network-based. Therefore, a language is organized as a network of entities related by propositions of spreading, activation, and node creation. So, in this, grammar knowledge is largely a body of knowledge about words. So there is no rules, principles, or parameters of complement the network. So to summarize, we have here a table showing us the different grammatical models of linguistics from its principle, aim, mechanism, of the 5 major grammar, which are the traditional, structural, generative, functional, and cognitive grammar. And that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for your time. My name again is Abdul Qadir Al Safi. Please do not forget to click like, subscribe to this channel for more video on language learning related.